Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 7, the Department of Social Services Act. It's quite simple, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the name change has to be taken care of in terms of it now being just the Department of Social Services. The legislation will be also modernized to some degree to bring it in line with other departmental legislation. And I would just elaborate on one small principle, and that is that it will allow the minister, where necessary, to incorporate in the contractual arrangements with various organizations sort of a mechanism that will allow the protection of the public's money where large sums are going into capital expenditures in the community organizations.
The Honourable Minister of Social Services has moved first reading to Bill number 7, Department of Social Services Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Department of Social Services Act, introduced by Honourable Mrs. Osterman, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 29, an act to amend the Department of Manpower Statutes Amendment Act 1986. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to change the name of Manpower Department to the Department of Career Development and Employment to more appropriately reflect new initiatives and priorities in the important areas of training and employment. Bill 29 also moves general department responsibilities from the Manpower Development Act to the Department Act.
The Minister of Manpower has moved first reading of Bill number 29, Department of Manpower Statutes Amendment Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to this motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? So ordered.
A bill being Department of Manpower Statutes Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honourable Mr. Orman, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests. Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my first question to the Premier. Given the sorry and utter failure of this government's efforts to receive federal help during this particular energy crisis, I wonder what plan the Premier has to undertake a speaking tour of the country to explain the difference between royalties, which belong to the people of Alberta, and the PGRT, which is an intrusion into provincial jurisdiction.
Mr. Speaker, it may be that in some places speeches will help, although I must say that I feel that just this week, dealing with leaders of this entire nation, that the Premier's indicated very clearly that they understand the difference and that they feel that this is a national problem and requires national assistance. So while we seem to be having a time educating people in Ottawa, I don't think that is the case with Canada.
Oh, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It seems that the Minister of Energy was listening to the same little birdies that plagued the Premier when he announced earlier this week on behalf of the Federal Energy Minister that the PGRT would be gone as of yesterday. What steps has the Premier taken to reprimand the Minister for undiplomatic remarks which appear to have cost us our chances of getting rid of this tax?
I might say, Mr. Speaker, they just better listen to a different birdie. Mine was accurate.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. During the Executive Council estimates on July 10th, the Premier noted that this government had already slashed royalties badly and warned that royalty cuts would result in buyouts of the smaller companies and little new exploration. What plan does the Minister of Energy have to educate Alberta's Tory MPs on this point so that they can do their job of representing the best interests of Alberta in Ottawa?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as honourable members know, the Alberta caucus and the federal MPs and our own caucus met recently where we had a thorough discussion on energy and other matters. And there's in my view, a very clear distinction between royalties and PGRT on the part of our members, and we have our Alberta MPs, many of them fighting very hard for us. So in terms of communicating to Ottawa, we've done so through our federal MPs, we've done so through our discussions between myself and the federal minister and my predecessor, and we will continue to press home the message that the PGRT is an odious, discriminatory tax that should be removed immediately, and we'll continue to hammer that message home. The chairman of our Alberta caucus particularly is fighting very hard to have the federal government remove that immediately, and we will continue to hammer that message home as well.
Well, final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I would note a lot of talk to no avail with the federal counterparts here. Final supplementary to the Premier. Does the Premier have any plan to advance our PGRT fight by suggesting to the voters of Pembina that they make a strong vote of opposition on the by-election September 29th, sending a message to the Mulroney government?
It would not be my intention to use that avenue, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Does the Premier have any plans to initiate direct discussions with Prime Minister Mulroney in the light of the difficulty of the two rookie ministers to get on the same wavelength, or is he just going to allow the matter to drift as it has to date?
The answer is yes and no, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Little Bow.
Supplementary question to the Premier. Could the Premier indicate when, in terms of the answer yes? I think that would be very important at this time.
Very quickly, Mr. Speaker, I intend to discuss it with the Prime Minister. I do not agree that there has been a failure by our Minister of Energy. I think he's made his position very clear. He's expressed it very clearly to Mr. Mass, and he's expressed it publicly very clearly. Sometimes it takes more hammering on the head before people start to actually understand. If that's what it takes, that's what we'll do.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe, supplementary.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. In view of the communique on energy, Mr. Premier, I wonder if the Premier will be contacting the other premiers of this country and encouraging them to phone their MPs and put some pressure on their federal members, as I'm sure all members of all parties of this legislature will do this weekend.
Mr. Speaker, it's an interesting proposal. There's no question that the premiers recognized with their move to have policies shift away from favoring manufacturing and industrial areas towards assistance to commodity and resource areas, that they recognize that the strength of this country is in the strength of the regions. And that if a region such as the West is suffering either in agriculture or energy, then there is no satisfaction to be had by Canadians anywhere else. And that therefore, The need is to help the areas that are having trouble. That's the strength of Canada. And it's something that Albertans did in the past when there was help needed for other parts of Canada. I think the premiers recognize that this need to collectively help any region of Canada that needs help is the way this nation will be strong. That is something we have to get across as premiers, representing every part of Canada, to the federal government, who do not seem to have the same appreciation as the premiers do for the full extent of this country. And I'm very pleased that we have the support of the premiers. It gives us additional assistance when we are talking to the federal government. We'll be making that point very strongly with them.
Second main question.
Thank you,
Member for
Mr.
Edmonton
Speaker.
Highlands.
I'd like to direct my second question to the Minister of Education. Yesterday, the Minister expressed some confusion, I think, about the departmental support for Category 4 schools. I would like to ask a question about a Category 1 school, in fact. Can the Minister explain how the department justifies the fact that the Alberta taxpayers' dollars are being used to support a school known as the Beanstalk School and its program Education Alive in Edmonton, both of which are offshoots of the Scientology movement or cult?
Mr. Speaker, the Beanstalk School is in fact a Category 4 school in this province.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question. Scientology has been termed one of the oldest, wealthiest, and most dangerous of the major cults operating in America today. Is it the policy of this government to provide public funds to cult schools, given that the principle of the Beanstalk School has been explained by its principal to our office as having its methods based on the Scientology philosophy?
Well, I think with respect, Mr. Speaker, there's confusion on the part of the acting leader of the opposition today. Category 4 schools, number one, do not receive any funding from this province. Secondly, I am concerned that the Church of Scientology has set up its own private school. And as I indicated yesterday, my clout as the Minister of Education is with respect to the approval of curriculum for the Category 4 schools. Part of the agreement which was reached before the Category 4 status was agreed to by the Department of Education was that Scientology would not be taught within that classroom. That agreement is in writing. I have instructed inspectors of the Department of Education to keep a very close eye on the curriculum being taught in that school, and I intend to continue that process.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister is prepared then to table reports of the monitoring her officials are doing on this particular school so that the public itself can be assured that there is no diversion from the ordinary curriculum into the bizarre philosophy of the cult?
I'm not prepared at the moment to do that, Mr. Speaker. As I have indicated, I am keeping a very close eye on that school. If I'm concerned that there is a certain amount of intolerance, or if there is a breach of the agreement which has been reached before that school was granted certification as a Category 4 school, then I will act accordingly.
Final supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I wonder then if the Minister can indicate just what sort of workable monitoring procedures she has in place whereby instances of deviation from the approved curriculum, that is, that authorized by her department, would be reported immediately to the public and particularly to the parents of children attending the schools.
It's an important question, Mr. Speaker, and I think the parents have an important role here. When a parent enrolls his child in a school which is not funded by this province, I think there is a particular responsibility on that parent if he sees that there is something being taught in the school with which he disagrees, to be a monitor in himself. It is, after all, his children which are at stake. I am concerned for the broader perspective, which is that I am responsible for all children's education in this province, whether grades or from 6 to 16. And as I indicated yesterday, I will be keeping a very watchful eye on what is taught to those students, and if I see any breach of what I believe is in the best interests of that student, I will act accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary to the minister. Will the minister bring forward any change in legislation or regulations during this sitting that will prevent these types of schools that have the potential to exploit children in a very subliminal fashion?
Mr. Speaker, as I have indicated, the whole issue of private education, as well as other issues, is part of a new school act, which I plan to be introducing, if I can, next spring of 1987. The issue of private schools in this province has received a tremendous amount of public discussion, public hearing process. There are some who argue that Category 4 schools are still too much controlled by the Department of Education because of the clout that I have as minister to control their curriculum. I am reviewing the matter very thoroughly. I do not believe a quick step to fill in what is an apparent gap is the answer at this moment. I would rather a comprehensive policy which I propose under the new School Act.
Main question on behalf of the Liberal Party, the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Energy, as our oil industry disintegrates, Mr. Speaker, the incompetence and bad judgment of the government becomes more apparent every day. The Minister of Energy has obviously totally misread his federal counterpart. The government's drilling and exploration programs have been failures because we have instability and a lack of confidence. To the Minister, how could you expect the federal government to drop the PGRT without some plan to ensure that the benefits of that dropping would be expended in drilling and jobs in this province and not just pocketed by the beneficiary oil companies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, really, I find that kind of a question incredible coming from an Albertan. That we would have a resident of this province trying to tie strings to the most odious, discriminatory tax that's been imposed upon Canadians by, I guess, his support, or the government he was supporting, and appears as though he's continuing to support. The PGRT tax by the majority of Albertans is recognized for what it is, a tax on revenues that has been not imposed by the federal government or any other government on other industries. Now, the royalty situation is entirely a different picture. The royalty is the owner's rent on a resource, and the royalties of this province have been reduced over the last several years. August 1st, 85, August 1st again this year, and will be reduced again next year. So yesterday, when the federal minister suggested that we should be tying royalties with this odious PGRT, I find that more obnoxious. The royalty structure we will do with as owners of the resource, and we have said in the past that we would consider possibilities as to what we might do with that particular situation. But number one, I think that there's a misconception about what our revenues are in this province as it relates to royalties. We hear the CPA and others suggesting, or the impression they're leaving is that it's between 30 and 40%, when it is not between 30 and 40% as an average. The net royalty return to this province is 15%. And I think that if more people had that understanding, they would find that it's ridiculous to be suggesting that we tie the two together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obvious why we're doing so well with those persuasive powers. Would the Mr. Speaker, would the honourable minister tell the House exactly what concessions and undertakings the federal government is exacting from this province in return for some kind of assistance? What do they want in the way of concessions and royalties and in other ways? Is it future royalties or past royalties? Just what?
Well, the honourable member heard the results of the speech given by the federal minister yesterday in Calgary, indicating what strings they thought should be attached. In my meeting with the federal minister after that particular speech in Calgary, we discussed a particular proposal. I presented a proposal to him as it relates to price stabilization, and it's our intent to work with the federal minister in seeing whether or not we can develop a proposal, or that particular proposal, within a very short time period. So in general, the meeting was a good one in the sense that we are moving in the direction of examining these proposals, and I hope to be able to meet with the federal minister in a very short time period.
Did the honorable minister get any indication from the federal government that they are prepared to do anything beyond eliminating the PGRT in the event that they do get a package agreement with this province?
The message given to the Chamber of Commerce yesterday in Calgary and all Albertans was they're tying PGRT to royalties, which is unacceptable.
Right. Some more. Finally, Mr. Speaker, in light of the fact that one of the few sums of money readily available to this province lies in delay of gas deregulation, is the government being muscled by the federal government into proceeding with deregulation on November 1st, even though the restrictive gas surplus rules with respect to reserves and pricing are still in place and have been criticized as unacceptable by the industry?
Mr. Speaker, there was no indication yesterday of any muscling or tying together of deregulation with the other issues we've been talking about. However, we did have a discussion on the deregulation of natural gas, discussed the concerns, the very real concerns of the industry with respect to proceeding November 1st, 1986. We will be working with the industry and the federal government to try to eliminate those barriers and would be attempting to meet that deadline of November the 1st, but we'll make that decision as we get closer to that date.
Member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the minister. As I understand it, both the federal government and the provincial government want to eliminate PGRT by a certain date. The discussion right now is when. And could the minister indicate in the early discussions when the federal government agreed to the November 1st date whether there was any trade-off at that time, or was that a policy announcement of the federal government that they would meet a commitment to eliminate the tax after a period of time?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I understand the honourable member's question, I think it's a very important one, in that when the Western Accord was signed, there was the agreement to phase out over a period of time the PGRT, and there was no tying together at that time of eliminating the PGRT with our royalties. So why should there be today?
The member for Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister of Energy please explain why, given that Alberta only receives an average of 15% for ownership, that consumers pay 51 cents per litre in Eastern Canada, 47 cents on average in the Golden Triangle, and 35.7 cents here, and what this price disparity means for Albertans?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of components that go into making up the price of a litre of gasoline at the pumps. And right here in the province of Alberta, as of June, and I would say right here in Edmonton as of June, the federal government take on a litre of gasoline was about 9.5 cents versus the provincial take of about 3.5%, and that's, or 3.5 cents. And that was a reduction from 8.5 cents on a litre of gasoline in January. So you can see the significant reduction that the Alberta government is getting on a litre of gasoline over that time period because of the royalties being tied to the price situation. With respect to other provinces across this country, we all know that there's a significant tax at the pumps in all provinces except Alberta and Saskatchewan. And when you have, for example, in the province of Ontario, an 8.3 cents per litre tax at the pump, and in Quebec, a 10.3 cents per litre tax on the pump, you can see why there are significant differences in prices across the country. So when you examine the numbers, and they range from about 14 cents per gallon, 14.5 cents per litre rather, down to 0 for this province, that we should have a wide price range at the pumps across the country.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, given that the Minister is not getting anywhere with his buddies in Ottawa, what proposals does he have for an Alberta-only strategy to deal with this oil crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, we did proceed yesterday afternoon to have discussions about options. We did present a proposal to the federal government, and it's our intention to discuss that proposal further and try to achieve action soon. And I think it's premature to be outlining any proposals that are insinuated by, or the direction that's insinuated by the member opposite.
Main question, Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Solicitor General, and it's relative to the privilege of having a driver's license in the province of Alberta. Earlier, my colleague from Clover Bar raised the matter that a number of people, after losing their license, are able to secure that license. I was wondering if the Minister could indicate at this time how soon the current study will be completed on this matter, and we'll have details in this Assembly.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate that the recent occurrence of the gentleman incarcerated for 7 years and losing his license for life brought up the matter that there may be some bureaucratic openings in our system of procuring a license. We have initiated a very thorough review of this, and I'm hoping within the next 2 weeks that we will have the system revamped to prevent such happenings in the future. I might point out to the honourable member, though, that where there is a criminal mind, usually where there's a will, there's a way, no matter how intricate you try to make the system. And I'd like to point out that we aren't interested in instituting a system whereby your fingerprints are necessary to get a driver's license or something to that effect. In this particular instance, I believe the licenses were obtained from out of province. One instance it was in province, and our review will indicate where there are holes, and they will definitely be plugged.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate whether one of the alternatives being considered would be stiffer penalties for false declaration in cases such as this within the province?
Mr. Speaker, in the event that a false declaration was made, if it's made under oath, of course, you're procuring something under fraud, and there's definitely opening at that time to face criminal prosecutions, be it a fine or incarceration as to whatever the judiciary may levy. We're hoping that we can design the system whereby the declaration can be tripped up, false or honest.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. The Minister indicated that some of the securing of licenses occurred outside of the province. Could the Minister indicate what action is being taken or is contemplated to coordinate an updating with other provinces and to coordinate a better surveillance program in matters such as this with the other provinces of Canada?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Department has initiated, as of the beginning of this week, a review with the other provinces to instigate a system whereby we can have checks and balances between each province in license applications.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Relative to insurance, which is compulsory and required, could the Minister indicate whether any study is going on at the present time as to how many people are driving without insurance, how many vehicles are uninsured? Is that type of review in progress as well?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of a study that underway to find out what cars or vehicles are insured or not insured. We are definitely having a study underway relative to drivers that are driving while suspended. That particular item was thought to be quite important by the department, and we did a recent check during 1 month and found that in addition, in over 200 instances out of 20,000 drivers that received tickets of various sorts were driving while suspended. And we have had in process prior to this particular event a system up, and we hope to have it running by September 1st, which will be a suspended driver apprehension program, or as I mentioned in my estimates, automated alert, which will interface our Motor Vehicles Division computer with those of all police forces to indicate when a person gets a traffic or parking violation. If the police were not aware that they were suspended, that we can then subsequently apprehend the person and charge him with driving while suspended. And again, the judiciary will have to decide the penalty on that.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona, supplementary.
Yes, to the Solicitor General, Mr. Speaker, can the Solicitor General inform the Assembly how it can be that it's been possible for these drivers who've been suspended or had their license cancelled, nonetheless to obtain duplicate licenses, since, in view of the fact that since 1978, all police forces across Alberta have had access to the Canadian Police Information Centre, which has driver and operator suspensions and cancellations in the computer.
Mr. Speaker, on the CPIC, or pardon me, we don't want acronyms, the Canadian Police Information Computer System, since '83 has had record of all suspensions, whether they come through the whatever mode of criminal code offense that may have occurred. From '78, when the system came into effect, they only had traffic offenses necessitating fingerprinting on record. So there was some confusion at that time. But I might point out to the Assembly that when you have a license suspension, it generally comes from two modes. One, from criminal code offenses, which are definitely entered into the police information computer system. However, if you lose your license or you're suspended from driving through demeritable accumulation of points, that is kept in the Motor Vehicle Division computer and is not in the police information computer. This suspended driver apprehension system that we are instigating will interface these two computers, and the police will then have automatic information on all sorts of suspensions.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo, supplementary.
To the Honourable Minister, will the Minister follow the British Columbia precedent and provide for a mandatory 7-day prison sentence for those drivers who continue to drive while their license has been suspended for impaired driving?
Mr. Speaker, the imposition of a prison sentence is not in my jurisdiction.
Supplementary, member for Banff-Cochrane.
To the Solicitor General, Mr. Speaker, would the Solicitor General take into consideration during the review of this situation the possible establishment of a form of advisory committee which may involve representatives of other provincial departments to look into and to recommend solutions to this very difficult problem?
Mr. Speaker, we have in this investigation accessed knowledgeable people within our department and within the Attorney General's department to interface and determine what can be done. We, as I mentioned previously, are accessing the information of all other provinces to determine if they are experiencing the same difficulties and to find out what they have done or what they contemplate in doing. And at this time, I don't think we require an advisory committee.
Member for Calgary North Hill, followed by the member for Edmonton Belmont.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, and it concerns the trade communique recently issued from the Premier's conference. Given that Alberta led the fight to obtain agreement among the minister's counterparts in other provinces, in Belleville, Ontario, I believe in June of this year, for the reduction and indeed the elimination of interprovincial trade barriers, and given that we've seen little or no success or progress towards that objective, what steps pardon me, will the minister be taking to comply with the urgent action that the Premier's indicated?
Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to congratulate the honourable member for introducing motion 202 to the Assembly and drawing to the attention of the members this very important issue and having it agreed to by the members of the Assembly yesterday. The question of interprovincial trade barriers has been one that has concerned Albertans for some time. And we have, over the years, attempted to have those barriers reduced and dismantled. The member for North Hill properly refers to a meeting in Belleville on June the 4th that indicated that the ministers supported a dismantling of these barriers. The government of Alberta is very pleased with the support of these initiatives by all of the provinces, as indicated in the communique on trade, and particularly with respect to the 4 areas that were referred to in the communique, and the premiers have instructed their ministers to accelerate the process that was agreed to in Belleville. I intend to pursue this aggressively with my counterparts across the country by way of, first of all, our provincial working committee will begin the response to this by way of an inventory of all of the trade barriers that exist, and then a freezing of those trade barriers, and then a process by which they can be reduced or dismantled.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. In the event that the deadline that is mentioned in the trade communique, I believe of December of this year, cannot be met as contemplated by the communique, is the minister prepared, if you can't, let them join position in the event that you cannot make that deadline?
Mr. That's rather a hypothetical question, but I'm going to comment anyway, Mr. Speaker, if I may. In the fall of 1984, there were extensive discussions throughout the province on this and a number of matters when we were held forums on the white paper. One of the recommendations in the white paper, the Industrial and Science Strategy, was the erecting of barriers, the potential of erecting barriers in Alberta to protect Alberta companies. And that proposition was rejected throughout this province. And I believe that that continues to be the view of Albertans, that we believe that we can trade effectively within Canada and offshore, that we can compete effectively, provided we have the opportunity to compete in other jurisdictions.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister himself be taking a lead in convening a meeting of his provincial counterparts to pursue the initiatives of the trade communique?
I expect, Mr. Speaker, to be contacting my counterparts in the next 2 weeks to attempt to arrange a ministerial meeting to carry out the instructions of the first ministers that were agreed to in the communique.
Supplementary, member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister tell the House what sectors are slated as top priorities in negotiating the reduction of barriers?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure that I understand the question. The communique dealt with an agreement on a moratorium on new barriers and to establish a permanent mechanism to reduce existing trade barriers, and of course the item I referred to earlier, that is the establishment of an inventory of barriers that exist, and to establish a set of guiding principles for reducing them. That's the agreement. The inventory of the barriers is crucial in order to establish those that exist in other jurisdictions so that the dismantling process can proceed.
Supplementary, Calgary Forest Lawn.
To the minister, given that one of the greatest barriers to interprovincial trades is discriminatory freight rates, what initiatives or steps is this government taking to bring about greater justice in that area?
Mr. Speaker, Alberta has been a leader in rationalizing freight rates in Canada. We recently have received the report of the GTA on the review of the Western Grain Transportation Act, and the Minister of Agriculture and I have written a letter to the federal minister requesting a meeting in order that the recommendations of the GTA be implemented immediately. We've also implemented the Freed Freight Adjustment Program to assist Alberta agriculture, and we have also established the Alberta Intermodal Systems to provide a reduction in freight rates for Alberta shippers of up to 50%.
Member for Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions again today are to the Minister of Labour regarding amusement rides. The Minister has on 2 occasions, Mr. Speaker, skipped away from questions about the letter from his senior inspector warning of a catastrophe with the Mindbender. What are the results of the Minister's review of which senior officials or ministers received a copy of that letter? Who saw the letter?
Mr. Speaker, I'll repeat my answer of yesterday.
3. Can the Minister assure the Assembly that the letter was brought to the attention of the Deputy Minister who brought it to the attention of the Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I think these events happened before I was in the portfolio.
Well, has the Minister has the Minister yet adopted as a matter of policy that such serious warning letters should be brought to the attention of the Minister immediately? And if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker, my communications with the department's senior officials are not just in written form, they occur on the telephone in direct conversations. I would presume that a matter of such urgency would be brought to my attention from now on, certainly.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given that the department is allowing 555 to conduct its own inquiry into the submarine accident because departmental investigators don't seem to understand the technology involved, how will the department be able to adequately assess 555's recommendations for change?
Mr. Speaker, I did briefly mention it yesterday, but in actual fact, the department has insisted that 2 other mechanisms be introduced into the submarine ride, and the ride will not start until those 2 separate systems, both of which are supposed to be fail-safe, are installed.
The member for Edmonton Gold Bar, supplementary, member for Vermilion Viking.
Yes, to the Minister of Labour. Could he indicate if it's compulsory for the public to use such rides or recreation places, and indicate the role of the government in relationship to the private sector and their running of these type of recreational areas?
Mr. Speaker, there seems to be considerable confusion about the role of government in relation to amusement rides. The role of government is to inspect and to make as sure as is reasonably possible that the rides are safe and are well maintained. The actual responsibility for the operation of the rides lies with those who purchase them, operate them, and who charge for their use. In this case, that's the 555 Corporation or perhaps some subsidiary of 555. It is not the responsibility of the government to continually monitor the operation of such rides, and I can see no possibility that the government is going to accept such a responsibility. People who choose to go on such a ride do it voluntarily, and it is not the role of government to operate the rides, nor is it the responsibility of government when something goes wrong. It's the responsibility of the owner and operator.
Member for Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Social Services. With 132,000 Albertans unemployed, an 11% increase since July of '85, and little hope of improvement with the winter months approaching, has the Minister of Social Services determined the numbers of Albertans that are now on social assistance compared with this time last year, and will she inform the House?
Mr. Speaker, the numbers are approximately 59,000 families at this point in time. I'm sorry I don't have available last year's figures, but I'll get them for her.
Mr. Speaker, has the department increased the number of social assistance workers in the areas most effective, and by how many? For instance, in the City of Edmonton, which has seen unemployment figures rise to 50,000 from 44,000 in the last year.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will recall that we had a number of discussions about social workers and their very heavy caseloads earlier on in the session. And indeed, we have increased the numbers. I believe the increase would be in the neighbourhood of 20 to 25 workers in each of the major cities, but I will also check on the figure as it is exact.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Will the Minister tell the House, has the department conducted a study to determine the success of the much vaulted job-finding programs offered to social assistance recipients? I'm talking about not just securing jobs, but retaining them.
Mr. Speaker, that subject also was raised in the discussion of departmental estimates, and the honourable member may recall that I did note that my information was that, and it was preliminary, albeit preliminary, that there were 50 to 70% of those who were completing the courses at the job finding centres were able to attain employment. Obviously, it's very critical that we follow up with those people to see the permanency of the employment, and I will have a complete report for the legislature early on in 1987 when, in fact, the project is completed.
Mr. Speaker, yes, glad to know we're doing the study of retention. Will the minister tell the House then what is the cost per person of these job-finding programs, these commercial job-finding programs that are operating?
That's, again, a matter of some detail, Mr. Speaker. It will vary depending on the contractual arrangement with the specific job-finding centre. I'll be pleased to provide that information to the honourable member.
Supplementary, member for Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Supplementary, will any additional job-finding centres be allowed to open until such time that that evaluation is done?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware that we've had an indication of interest by any other organizations or commercial groups in this area. Obviously, it would be my intention to explore every avenue, ideas that are raised with the department and with myself in terms of enhancing the opportunities for the unemployed to find jobs. And if that becomes under the purview of my department and a program that I could look at, I certainly would.
Time for question period has expired. The Minister of Tourism wishes to make a correction to a statement made previously.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, August the 11th, 1986, in the Committee of Supply, I responded to a question posed by the member for Edmonton-Belmont concerning the Alberta Wildlife Park. And I wish to clarify the comments I made at that time relative to the government's involvement in providing assistance to that park. At the time the government became involved, the Wildlife Park and related facility, the Red Barn, had a combined outstanding debt of $1.8 million. on the takeover of the Alberta Wildlife Park, a private facility, by the Alberta Wildlife Park Foundation, which is a non-profit society. The government provided $900,000 as a one-time debt reduction on behalf of the Alberta Wildlife Foundation. The remaining debt, an additional $900,000, became the responsibility of the Red Barn, which continues to operate as a separate private entity. My correction, Mr. Speaker, is to the particular statement I made recorded on page 1024 of Alberta Hansard of August the 11th, 1986, and I stated that $900,000 was provided by the government and $900,000 by the foundation. As I have indicated, I should have said $900,000 was provided by the government on behalf of the foundation, and the remaining $900,000 became the responsibility of the private operation, the Red Barn.
Orders of the day.